Welcome to SeerCast, where founders and CEOs from the banking, payments, and fintech industry share their knowledge and expertise on solving real world problems. You'll receive tips and techniques on various topics that you can use right away, such as growing a startup, finding funding, bank fintech relationships, change in regulations, and so much more. I'm Adwait Joshi, and I'm founder and chief seer at Data Seers. So let's get started. All right, I'm super excited to have my really good friend, Cathryn Peirce, who is the founder and CEO of Carbon Zero, a topic of interest for many folks out there, ESG,
Yeah.
focusing on carbon credits and offsetting people's carbon footprints out there. So, Cathryn, tell us a little bit more about you, the company, and how did you come up with the idea?
Yeah. So my background is behavioral change. I'm really fascinated by that which inhibits us from more effectively acting according to our purported values, particularly with respect to the environment. So I started that work as a student at the University of Pennsylvania. I was actually paid to go into fraternities and the football team to talk about interpersonal violence reduction, essentially sexual violence. And I actually loved the work. I found that most of us do, in fact, have shared intentions for ourselves as individuals and our communities. We're just not great at consistently aligning our actions with those intentions. And as such, we're not as effectively championing or kind of solving these issues as we could be. And so after I graduated, I was a Fulbright scholar in Ivory Coast, West Africa. They were coming out of a civil war in 2014. I was there in 2016. Again, looking at what are the goals for the community and how do we systemize solution building such that we're actually meeting those goals. Then I was a backpacker through Africa, Europe, and Asia for a year and a half. And then I was director of marketing at a brokerage where I studied consumer behavior, gleaned insights to more effectively drive consumer spend in certain ways. But I realized we can put this use of data to drive consumer behavior in dialogue with my passion for behavioral change for social impact. And in so doing, we use insights and incentives to help people understand the carbon impact of their spend and then actually do something about it. And so Carbon Zero Financial does just that. We enable any credit card to add ESG features to their products such that cardholders can measure, offset, and reduce their carbon impact as they spend.
That's cool. I try to reduce my carbon impact by reducing my weight. So I feel like if I'm lighter, I have less carbon,
Yes.
right?
How's
So,
that going for
I'm
you?
sorry.
How's that going for you?
Exactly, it's working out really well, right? I have made a big impact on reducing my weight and hence reducing the carbon footprint.
There you go.
So, let's talk about that a little bit because people want to track it. People want to know their impact on, the environment, but it's not easy to do so, right?
No.
Because there is no standards yet. There are some, but they are kind of, a little bit hazy. So
Mm.
it's left to interpretation. But it's changing right now. The big fours are starting to audit the model. When you say that I have an ESG model and I can tell you what is your carbon footprint or how are you offsetting your carbon footprint, they have a way to audit the model. So I'm like, okay, if you are auditing the model, there has to be some standards, there has to be some governance in place, some measurement criteria. So what are you seeing out there when it comes to that?
Admittedly, we are still in the early days, particularly as it relates to kind of carbon offsetting, standardizing, and normalizing accessibility to carbon impact assessment technology. We are still in the early phases. I would say Europe's also a bit farther along in that government policy is facilitating. So whether or not companies have to have a kind of are mandated to disclose information on their supply chain, on their, we're limited in the access to or the data to which we have access in the United States when it's not compulsory for organizations to be more transparent. Nonetheless, it's very clear that both consumer demand and corporate mandates around ESG are on the rise. And as such, of course, there's innovation and there's a lot more adoption. Um, we're finding that people do, to your point, want to know the carbon impact, but it's not easy if you feel like you have to go out and buy your own product, or if you're kind of just doing the guesswork. And the ease with which people can access the tools and resources to know their impact obviously informs how many people are then mobilizing around the solution. So for us, it's kind of a no-brainer that the very card with which they're transacting should be the source from which they're getting their carbon impact assessment data. They already have all their spend on there. We have a good understanding then of where you're buying, what you're buying with what cadence, etc. And to us, it's about meeting consumers where they are to get them where they need to be. So instead of asking you to download a new app, kind of subscribe to a new service, we're saying, hey, you already have a credit card. That can be the very tool with which we are gathering and then assessing carbon impact.
So it's like a mint for carbon impact, really.
Yeah, it's trying to, I think, critical to behavioral change is capitalizing on what people are already doing. It's about making tweaks where possible, but we have to meet people where they are. And they already have credit cards. They're already transacting with those cards. They're already opening the app to pay their balance. As such, that's the perfect location to start educating, giving those insights, and then gamifying it such that they want to be part of the change.
Exactly, exactly. So they might already be doing something good. They just don't know about it because nobody's offering it.
Yeah, and I think very often what I say is what the Fitbit did for fitness, fintech can do for payments. If we give people more data to incentivize behavioral change and to actually track it, people want to meet these goals. We're competitive with ourselves. Now I really care about getting my 10,000 steps. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd been like, why would I care about that? So that which we measure, we can more effectively gamify. And that's what we want to do for both environmental and social impact. Make it such that we can understand that impact, we can set new goals around it, and there's easy and clear actionable steps that we can take in order to achieve it. So just as I know how to reach my 10,000 a day, I take steps, so too do we have to be very clear and prescriptive about how people can reduce their carbon impact, which in our case is through offsetting and also shopping more sustainably.
Okay, so you are a B2B model.
Yeah.
So the idea is that it's a SaaS product and
Mhm.
you offer the product to other businesses. So let's talk a little bit about, your journey as a founder and CEO, your journey to getting funded, your journey to actually launching the product and the whole 9 yards, because that's what our audience really wants to hear.
And I have to say, it was very helpful being a backpacker. When I think back on my experience, the thing that most poised me to be able to handle founderdom truly was being a solo backpacker. You're problem solving constantly, you're stretching dollars, you're like, we're going to figure this out. We're going into the unknown with smiles on our faces. So initially, our concept was in fact B2C. We were like, we will launch a credit card around this. We will have this be technology that we alone offer, etc. And then I think we started to understand that though there is increased demand for this, people nonetheless still put financial criteria as the primary driver of financial decisions. And so other kind of credit cards in the space that were really just creating a climate card weren't getting the scale and traction that justified being a credit card. And the unit economics of a credit card program are really difficult. And so on the precipice of launching our own credit card, I kind of took a moment, took a breath, and was like, nope, that's not the way we should do this. Quite the better way to scale this is not to compete for wallet share as a credit product, but instead to be a feature on every single credit card in the wallet. And so we are no longer of the belief that you should launch one climate card. Instead, we have far greater scale of impact and therefore profitability if every credit card in the wallet has climate features. And so we are B2B white label, as you said, and continue to be gratified and heartened by the fact that we made that decision. But it is a very different landscape then. So B2C, there's a certain excitement and alacrity with which you move because customers are signing up. They're excited. Selling into banks is slower, a lot,
Yes.
a lot slower. And so it has changed both the tempo then of at what pace we can meet these milestones. We are very fortunate in that banks are very excited about our messaging. They are very excited about our technology, and they are acutely aware of the fact that they both have to do more around ESG, but they also have to do more to attract Gen Z. Gen Z consumers expect data-driven insights. They expect personalized experiences, tech savviness. A lot of banks lack that. So we absolutely can address the pain points that banks are experiencing, and we can drive innovation in really compelling ways. But the rate at which we can do so, just based on the tempo and movement of a bank, has definitely changed the pace of being a founder and being a startup. you also asked about funding. So to date, we've largely only did an angel round and then have been bootstrapped. And it's interesting. You and I have actually talked a lot about the pros and cons, the merits and drawbacks of taking investor money. I think it's been a tumultuous market. It's interesting to speak to VCs about the changing goalposts of that which constitutes pre-seed, seed, Series A, who's struggling, who's not. Fintech had its heyday. Fintech investment is down tremendously, particularly with B2C, less so with B2B. But nonetheless, it's every time we have conversations with investors, we're trying to figure out, do we actually need investment right now? Can we actually continue bootstrapping? How far can we get with that? How long can we extend runway? And I think it's imperative for all businesses right now to get back to a fundamental understanding of, what does it look like to be profitable? If we're only alive because we continue to take incredibly large amounts of money from VC, I think the layoffs we're seeing right now are indicative of the fact that that model doesn't always work, and you can become bloated and you can forget that you actually need to get profitable, that the actual kind of business 101 isn't there. So long story short, as we both change our model such that we're B2B and that changes the pace at which we work, we're also having more reflection on, at what point do we take investor money? Do we intend to do a round? When? And do we also want to wait for a more opportune time in the market, because terms right now aren't as great as they used to be?
Correct. And I'm biased, as you know. We
Yeah,
haven't raised money, and I
I
don't
know.
know if and when I will raise money.
I
But
know.
that's so true, right? We feel like, at least I look at it back and feel fortunate that we didn't raise money.
You
Definitely
can't
didn't
miss
raise
out.
it on the wrong terms, right? From the wrong people. Otherwise, I would be driven in a different direction. And if you look at many folks out there, are doing extension rounds and they're not announcing them because they're burning through cash. They
Yeah.
haven't reached that profitability. And sometimes people look at it and it's like necessity versus nice to have. At least banks look at it that way, right? So for us, being a AML tool, being a fraud tool, it's a necessity,
Yeah.
because I don't know about the ESG business, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But 2020 certainly helped businesses like us, because as COVID hit, fraud increased, and there was a different type of fraud that came to existence, which means people started paying more attention to and investing money in tools like a data series, right? Where
Yeah.
they wanted to go and get more, identify more fraud patterns and report them and so on and so forth. But I think from an ESG market perspective, we also saw a lot more happening post pandemic than
Mhm.
pre pandemic, because in the last 2 years or so, people have been talking a lot more about it, and then they're doing something about it, and they're measuring it, and then they're reporting it. So
Yeah.
what do you see the industry?
So there's a phrase that I coined, or at least I'd like to think I coined it. If someone else, you'll have to let me know if you found it elsewhere. But I think there have been a fair number of what I call fair weather fintechs. And these are fintechs, to your point, that maybe in the best of circumstances and in good times, it's a great product. People are investing in it, but it's not pandemic proof. It's not, they're suffering now, or in fact going out of business. That these are kind of nice to haves, to your point, but not essential to the business, or necessarily essential to the reality of what's going on, as a permanent facet of life. And as it were, climate is a permanent facet of life. It in fact only gets more intense, and the IPCC reports only get more grave. So to that end, I think some of the factors that have in fact made it susceptible, sustainability remains popular, though we see a lot of investment is down across fintech, even healthcare, insurtech, etc. Sustainability has actually stayed pretty strong, and I think the reasons for that are: one, climate continues to get worse and the reports get worse; two, 66% of global GDP is under 2050 net zero commitments, few of whom know how they're doing that. And so, as you have all these companies who, particularly when the spotlight was on them, made all these promises, now they're scrambling to find solutions. They're scrambling to figure out how they even do that. And as brands feel like they need to align their public image with climate positive actions, with ESG, they seem to profess things before they actually have any idea of how they'll practice them. And so that's where we kind of get to reap the benefit of saying, all right, you have made some pretty lofty promises about what you intend to do. Here are the technologies by which you can substantiate those promises. So to that end, I do think, much as your services are hardly going to go out of fashion anytime soon, climate is going to increasingly be a part of our lives, and I think we will increasingly expect it to be part of technical innovation and part of the very products we use, particularly around finance, considering that banks do have a reputation of being exacerbators of climate change based on their own investments. And so it's even more important then that they connect with their end users, their cardholders, in ways that are climate friendlier. And that is made manifest also in just the features they choose for their card products.
You see a drastic difference when you go to Europe versus America, right? They don't
Yeah.
give you plastic bags. They don't give you bags at all. You got to bring your own bags.
Mhm.
The difference is at every level. Plastic water bottles versus glass bottles, right? And recyclable glass bottles.
Mhm.
We live in a very different world out in the US. I mean, one of the things my father was trying to do was find a way to get the glass from a local city and recycle it, and he couldn't find it. They said that we dump it all, and then somebody goes there and keeps sorting it, right? And he was surprised to see that there isn't a clear cut way to actually reduce this waste, which goes directly back into how are we impacting the environment. So how much do you think that people in the US today are ready for a service like yours versus countries like Europe? Because people look up to us, people look up to America, but I feel like we are behind in many cases, 10 years, 20 years. Certainly when it comes to KYC, when it comes to payments, we are lagging, we are not leading, right? And it's time to change some of that. But how much does that affect you guys as a business when you go into people? Do you still have people that say climate what, everything is fine, nothing's changing?
Well, it's fascinating because I'm also I speak to a lot of the climate fintechs in Europe, some of whom have endeavored to come to the United States, and I think they're in for a surprise because when they do so, one, relative to the bank with whom you're trying to have a conversation, there's a big difference between speaking to a bank in Texas versus speaking to a bank in California. And so, relative to the bank, if you are trying to work with mid-size or even credit unions, community banks, we do have a lot of different thoughts and sentiments on climate. As I mentioned earlier, we also don't have a lot of national kind of federal policy that is facilitating with this. And so on the one hand, we are behind. When you do go to Europe, you see a lot of different models and systems that are more readily adopted, whether it is the use of public transportation, whether it is recycling and how common that is, whether it's the fact that there's not going to be plastic bags, etc. Um, uh, to that, though, I say one, necessity is the mother of invention. And as such, the fact that we are behind, we have a lot of work to do, and that creates opportunity for innovation. I would also say, though, that even though we perhaps have not normalized all of these behaviors to the extent that Europe has, I think COVID was a really interesting case study on when there's urgency and when there is, in fact, mandate or kind of both private sector and public policy drivers, we change behaviors very quickly. And so, though I'm not suggesting that we should go into a state of crisis that the pandemic kind of elicited and the immediacy with which we all of a sudden shut down, we are capable fundamentally of behavioral change and we are adaptable people. And so, to that end, I find that there's actually heartening indicators from that experience about our ability to make changes, to adapt to new realities in an effort to preserve our communities and to look out for each other. And similarly, I think we have to adopt that mentality with climate. But I do personally believe that the private sector has a tremendous role to play in this. If the government is not going to issue kind of new policies around this, though I very much think they should, private sector has a tremendous opportunity to be the leaders of this and to actually create new norms. So on the individual level, if you do have concerns about climate, just starting with what can I control in my day-to-day life, but then as people make services like ours more available through their products, that is a type of climate conscious raising effort unto itself. And the more that we're just aware of our behaviors, that is a starting point. That awareness begets a lot of new opportunities, and frankly then maybe does put pressure on also the government to be doing more on our behalf.
Shifting gears a little bit.
Yeah.
So, founder, CEO, obviously, you have a team.
Mhm.
Somebody wrote the software. So, team building is
Yeah.
a very difficult thing to do. Finding the right people. I was
Mhm.
just telling somebody today that people say, "Oh, raising money from the wrong investors is very expensive," and I told him that what's more expensive than that is a cost of churn,
Mm.
and losing the people that you started with. So tell us a little bit about how did you find your first employee, how did you build the
Yeah.
team, and what bonds them together?
So we're very fortunate in that the kind of first first hires, the kind of in the trenches teammates, come from a background with climate fintech explicitly. So we're founders of Buy with Impact, which is was a out of Canada a credit product that very similar model would assess for carbon impact and do automatic offsetting. Again, though, that's this B2C model where it's explicitly about climate, and they successfully sold that to Royal Bank of Canada. But I think fundamentally understood through that experience, actually B2B white label, like getting as much scale as possible on as many cards as possible, takes you farther than just having one credit product. And so it was really very fortunate to connect with those founders who were looking for kind of their next opportunity. I will say though, I'm very much of the opinion of keeping things as lean as possible. I'm mindful. As we were saying about investments, I want to extend runway, and I do think it's important to keep things as lean as possible and to be as an agile and swift of a machine as possible for as long as possible. So to that end, we have our core team and then independent contractors with whom we kind of fill in the gaps, particularly from a technological perspective of, okay, we need more front end back end engineers, we need help with this. So the core technologies are our own proprietary, but bringing in help where necessary. And then I think another opportunity then to amplify the impact of whatever energy you already have with that team are great advisors. And so we've been very fortunate in that the advisors from whom we've sought counsel, so to speak, are so invested in our mission, so invested in the vision, and are very well connected across finance, across climate, and with conscious kind of consumerism at large, people wanting to shop according to their values. So in my mind, it is very values oriented. Do people share the vision? Are people excited by the actual mission of this? And from that, we've found most of our synergies. But you're right. Any of these whether you're talking about a co-founder, whether you're talking about founding teams, advisors, it's not to be taken lightly. And there's the kind of compatibility of with whom do you work well, and from a communication standpoint, do your both flaws and strengths, are they compatible? Are you actually filling in the gaps that are necessary? And I think no matter what, there will be trial and error. But I think the best well, I forget what it is. The best defense is a strong offense. Best offense is a strong defense. But the best way forward is really through that clear communication and just being as open, honest, and transparent as possible about what's working, what's not, and then iterating as you go. And I'd be curious. I know you've obviously scaled your team. Your team's larger than ours. What are the things that you looked for? For us, it's very much been values. But for you, was there specific like personality traits?
So that's a great question. I was going to say that, what you said is so important is when the team is small and when you're growing, you have to be super close.
Yeah.
And even family, right? You kind of live with family for some time and then you're like, okay, I want to go away from them, right?
Yeah.
When you're working at an early startup, you're spending so much time with each other that you want to go away from them. If the personalities clash, it's always a recipe for disaster, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I'm pretty sure that somebody out there has tried to make a Match.com app for employers trying to
Right.
hire employees because
That was
what are your personalities that match, right? The 25 criteria that are going to make you a successful employee. But we actually took about 2 years ago. We were 12 employees, and then suddenly we exploded, and we are almost close to 100 now.
wow.
And one of the things we realized that in a rush, we had made some hires that were not a cultural fit for the company.
Yeah.
And they brought the whole company's, level of excitement down, right? And everybody was just not feeling motivated anymore. And so we said, okay, what happened here, right? How do we go from running at 100 miles an hour to suddenly dragging?
Yeah.
And what we realized was, we did not do an assessment on the personality of that person to see how they fit in and who they are.
Yeah.
And so we started using, a plugin. I'll give a plug for Test Gorilla. We started using Test Gorilla, right? $7.50 a test. It doesn't matter. It's like virtually free.
Yeah.
But what it allows us to do is test that person's personality really. Who are you? What is your personality? Who are you? And what motivates you? And that gives us an idea of whether or not this person is going to be a good fit. Now, for us, we are a multicultural, multilingual organization. We
Hmm.
have a good mix of men and women. We have a good mix of Americans and non-Americans. We have Europeans. We have Africans. We have Asians. We have South Americans. We speak so many different languages, 20 plus, I lost count now, right? Including some rare ones. So now what has become is it's important for us to actually go and find somebody who is unique, because that's what fits in. And we have kind of built a whole culture around that, saying, "Oh, you speak a different language. I don't have that on my company roster right now. All right,
My
we're going to
people
bring this
part.
person on, right?" So
Yeah.
something different, and it helps because we work so much, right? But we have to, let go at some point of time. We have to make it exciting. And what I feel is people's talent, right? So we will do a cookout, where everybody will bring, a specialty that they cook to work.
Ooh.
Um, and we do that several times in a year, right? We'll do a potluck here and there, a cookout, or a competition of some sort. And people get excited because they are like, "Oh, we're going to show you something from our country," right? I mean, even my mom gets involved, right? Last time she was here and we were doing this, she's like, "I'm going to cook something," right? So the excitement
Yeah.
is tremendous. And that's, I think, what people love about being here, with our company, is that, yes, work's going to get done, but we get to have fun together, right?
I think that's
And
the word fun. Actually letting people enjoy this is a lot of time. It's a big choice, like with whom will I work and what. I think people often quit because of bad bosses, but people often stay because they actually enjoy it. They have
yep.
fun in their day. And it's interesting. I know yours is in person. You are
Mhm.
actually in office. And I think that's something with which a lot of startups, including ourselves, are struggling is my first hires are out of Canada. So the two members that I was just referring to. And we're remote first. And I do think that trying to create culture, community in a virtual world is a very difficult task.
Mhm.
Um, and frankly, still trying to figure out exactly how we do so, what that looks like. I am very much an in-person person. I love people. I'm an extrovert. But the realities of both trying to be efficient with capital and then just where people are, we are remote. And so I think that's an entirely new hurdle that companies are dealing with in different ways and trying to come up with solutions in different ways. But it's difficult to create an ethos and to inspire fun, I think, in a remote context. And
Correct.
it's definitely something that is top of mind for us as we do think about getting larger of what does that look like? How do you instill a cultural like values? How do you have what does a virtual culture look like?
Exactly.
And not, I don't really have the answers to that yet. And I'd be curious if going forward, I'll stay tuned to your podcast to see if other people do.
Yeah, and people have, right? I interviewed somebody who focuses on bringing teams together on a regular basis as an event, right? Like an offsite.
Yeah.
Uh, but what is important, what you just said, is that, when people are behind a camera, behind a computer in a house, not everybody A has the right setup. B, they don't have the right temperament. C, then they're not meant to work from home. Like I remember in 2020, we were all working from home, and the state of Georgia opened on 1st of July or 1st of June, something like that. They said, "All right, we're open for business," right? Which means no more COVID restrictions.
Yeah.
And we did a survey. And yes, we were only 10 people at the time, or 11, whatever. So we did a survey and said, "Okay, what do people want to do?" And every single one of them said, "I want to go to work, right? I don't want to stay home. I want to go to work because I
Yeah.
have been home for 3 months and I haven't seen anybody else. And I just want to get out of my house, and I want to be somewhere, and be a part of something." And so it worked for us, but I have seen people build remote teams and do a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
We made that decision. It's not for us. Now we miss out on some great talent, but people that are here are amazing, right?
Mm.
And they kind of help each other, and that's the part that I like the most. Is when they're here, they don't get as stuck as much. Uh, when they're home, they seem to get stuck, and then they don't communicate that, and like 3, 4, 5 hours are gone, and I don't have an answer. Versus right now, they can just stop by somebody else's desk and say, "Hey, by the way, I need this answer."
Yeah. And I think actually to your point, it's interesting that everyone did want to go back to the office. And perhaps now part of company culture is in fact like, do you enjoy being in person? And I think increasingly companies, when they're assessing for who works, who fits, that may in fact be one of the criteria. Because I know conversely, there's people who are like, if you force me to come back to the office, I will quit. And
Yeah.
so when we consider now what company culture looks like and who in fact is a good fit or candidate to join, these are some of the questions that I think are going to be more top of mind. And again, no right or wrong answers. It's not to say one employee type is, but some things work better for some than others. And I know I very much love being in person. At the moment, it's not. We can't make that a reality just based on where we are and how we are, but it's something I'm mindful of a lot as well. And I think
I'm thinking, backpacking in a Mayan cave and working out of that sounds so much more
yeah.
fun, right?
Yeah, right. And to that end, it is interesting to consider even where people decide to live then. I think we've been seeing a lot of shifts of like, if I don't have to be here for work, if I can in fact be remote, where do I actually want to be and live? And some cities have really lost some appeal in the process where it's like, I was only here because I thought I was forced to be.
Mm-hmm.
um, but these are some of the kind of organizational dynamics about growing a company that I'm very interested in, and that I think will be fascinating to see how it plays out with even just future generations. Particularly when you think about Gen Z, they lived through this during some high school years, etc. What are some of the norms that they're going to expect or want? What does I don't know, but I fundamentally I do prefer in person for myself.
Yeah, well, luckily we don't have to force anybody to come to work. All I tell them is you
Yeah.
have access to my whiskey, and they're like, "All right, done. We get out to work."
Oh no, for me it would be the food. I was about to say I want an invite the next time you do one of these multicultural potlucks. I would be there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you're always welcome to come here down in Atlanta, and we are always having fun. And
Yeah.
just let us know when you're coming. We can make a special event. We can tell everybody to, hey, let's come cook.
Oh God, food is my love language. I will be there. Okay, we're putting it on the calendar next time you're having one.
There we go. Done. So this has been a great conversation, Cathryn. Thank you so much. We got to learn so much about ESG. It's a topic near and dear to me. We have been talking about it a lot, and about what impact do we make on the industry, and how do
Yeah,
we set some things apart from the rest of them? How do we make it accessible to other people, like tools and technology,
yeah.
and so on and so forth. So it's a great topic of conversation, especially for me and my whole team. And again, thank you for being on this podcast. I'm sure I'll see you in a couple of weeks at a conference somewhere, and we'll continue our conversation more. All right. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Well, thank you for having me. Love talking to you, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.